So Trump had his State of the Union the other night. I'm going to break down some of what he said. Here he is bragging about stuff that he shouldn't be bragging about.
We virtually ended the estate tax, or death tax, as it is often called, on small businesses, for ranches, and also for family farms. We eliminated the very unpopular Obamacare individual mandate penalty. And to give critically ill patients access to life-saving cures, we passed, very importantly, right to try. My administration has cut more regulations in a short period of time than any other administration during its entire tenure.
Oh boy, so let's break this down. You know, oftentimes I call Donald Trump the Fox News president, and others have called him the same thing, and that is the truest thing anybody has ever said, ever, because he's an actual Kool-Aid drinker. So, in other words, he has totally, utterly, completely fallen for the worldview that's presented on that network. And on that network, it is just doctrinaire right-wing politics with no deviation whatsoever. And that's how you get to a point where he brags about this stuff that it's in his own bubble that he's bragging. Most Americans are going to hear that and go, that's not necessarily a good thing. So I'm going to walk you through it in a second, but another example of this is when they did the GOP tax bill, Donald Trump apparently insisted behind the scenes that you call it the Tax Cut Act. He wanted the words tax cut in the bill. Why? Because, he's so thoroughly drunk the Kool-Aid of far-right ideology that he thinks, how could anybody disagree with tax cuts? How could anybody disagree with that? When, of course, the reality is your branding is supposed to be, highfalutin in a way where you try to, like, hook the opposition to it and try to make people think it's kind of above argument. It's like they did with the Patriot Act, for example. Terrible legislation that takes away, your protection from unreasonable search and seizure, an insane policy, but they called it the Patriot Act so they could turn around and go, oh, are you unpatriotic? Is that why you oppose this? So the original idea was for the tax cut bill called the Tax Reform Act. Now I think they did, I don't know the exact name, but I know tax cut is in there, Tax Reform and Tax Cut Act, I don't know, something like that. But tax cut is in there, and he insisted you put tax cut in there when other, branding experts were like, why would you do that? Stop. No, you're supposed to try to hook in the opposition and make it sound like you can't criticize it, and this isn't just a right-wing thing. But again, so drunk on Fox News, he thinks, who could disagree? Who could disagree with tax cuts? Well, especially the way they were crafted, a lot of people can, because 83% of the benefits went to the top 1% over a decade. So that's just one example. Now, let me walk you through it here and how embarrassing it is that he's bragging about many of these things. So first, he leads with the estate tax cut. First of all, dipshit, you're supposed to only say the death tax part. So that's the right-wing rebranding. The actual name of that tax is the estate tax. Why do they call it the estate tax? Because it only hits people with estates. The only people who feel that tax have estates. So it's when like a uber-wealthy, multi-millionaire person passes away, and they want to pass their wealth down to younger generations, that's when it kicks in. You have to, the line was, I think, 7.5 million, and then now the GOP tax bill made it so it's 11 million. So in other words, if you have $10 million, you're not going to get hit by the estate tax. If your family has $5 million, you're not getting hit by it. $1 million, you're not getting hit by it. It's only for like the mega wealthy. In fact, it only applies to, I think it's the top 0.02%. So, I mean, this does not affect regular people. But what Republicans did is they changed the branding of it, and they said, don't call it the estate tax, because then people are going to support that tax. So you have to reframe it, call it the death tax, so that you make average people think, oh shit, I'm going to die one day. I don't want the government taking my money, the, 27 grand that I'm leaving my kids. So, shit, I'm against the death tax. But it was a trick. It was a marketing trick. Now, Trump, again, is so deep in that right-wing bubble that sometimes he lets the truth slip. I massively cut the estate tax. That's what I did, the estate tax. And then he quickly changes and says, oh, the death tax. And then he lies and says, to help small businesses and family farms. I got news for you. It ain't small businesses that are, feeling the benefits of that. It's only the ultra wealthy. So, again, a lot of the stuff is framed terribly, and then it's also just lies because they try to make you think that this tax cut helps regular people when it just doesn't at all. Then he talks about the individual mandate, and he says, I got rid of the Obamacare, massively unpopular Obamacare individual mandate. Now, to be fair, he's actually right that of all of the policies in the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, that's the one policy that wasn't popular. People did not like the idea of the individual mandate where you're basically forced by law to go buy on the private for-profit health insurance market. So he's right that that's unpopular. However, the rest of the law, Obamacare, when you go provision by provision in the law, massively popular. So for example, under Obamacare, there's the Medicaid expansion. Massively popular. Under Obamacare, there's rules as to how much money that goes into a for-profit health insurance company goes to overhead costs versus how much actually goes to care. The old ratio used to be like 50-50 in some cases, or 60-40. Obamacare says 80% of the money taken in by these health insurance companies has to go towards actual health care. That massively popular provision. Letting kids stay under their parents' roles until they're 26. Massively popular provision. Protections for pre-existing conditions. Massively popular provision. Now, he is talking about how he gutted Obamacare, and they did repeal the individual mandate as part of the tax bill. He also signed multiple executive orders that basically shiv Obamacare. Like, for example, gutting the advertising aspect of the bill so fewer people know about it and use the exchanges and use Obamacare. Well, guess what? As a direct result of his healthcare policies, Donald Trump's healthcare policies, 7 million people lost healthcare in his time in office. They don't have health insurance anymore. They did, now they don't. 7 million more people. So if you would think that, these guys would be smart enough to know, hey, maybe I'll sidestep an issue where on the broader issue, I look like a jackass. But no, he doesn't sidestep the issue. He brings up Obamacare and acts like he did something massively popular. When again, in reality, all of his actions on Obamacare have been a giant net negative for the country. And by the way, he didn't even mention that his fucking replacement for Obamacare, Trump Care, that had an approval rating, depended on which poll you looked at, but it was anywhere from 13% to 21%. So as bad as Obamacare was, because it was a shitty, mild reform that copied a right-wing idea from the Heritage Foundation, Trump's was even worse and polled way worse. So healthcare is not something you should be bragging about. You should be embarrassed over it. Now then he goes on. This one's interesting. He brings up right to try. This is a little bit of a conundrum. This is a paradox, if you ask me. So the right to try thing is the idea that when you're on death's doorstep and you want to try a Hail Mary attempt to cure something, that now you have the right to try it, and it doesn't have to be FDA approved. It doesn't have to have pass all these regulations and these stringent tests. And the idea is, hey, listen, when you're about to die, you'll try fucking anything. So, by all means, go ahead. Now, I understand supporting that in theory. Like, the idea of that, I get. Because if I'm on death's door and some doctor comes out of nowhere, some researcher comes out of nowhere and says, hey, listen, we got this thing we're working on. It's only in the experimental phase. No guarantee it's going to work. In fact, it's probably not going to work. But if you want to try it, please, by all means, go right ahead. I get that. I get that you shouldn't have somebody step in between you and your doctor and say, no, we're not going to let you try that. However, just be under no illusions about why this is something that passed and why you got Republican support for it, but also plenty of corporate Democratic support for it. The reason is, let's face it, pharmaceutical company profits. Because that is a massively exploitable situation where Big Pharma wants to be able to exploit it. When somebody's on death's doorstep and they're willing to try anything, if you're a pharmaceutical company, you can fucking sell snake oil and get away with it and make a massive profit in the process. So really, it's a way to sidestep the regulatory process and pitch people unproven stuff. And honestly, it is Big Pharma taking advantage of people who are about to die for profit. So that's the dynamic of what's going to end up happening with Right to Try. It's going to be a lot of snake oil pitched to desperate people, and a lot of the stuff, probably almost maybe all of it, is not going to work to save somebody's life. But again, it's a tough question because in principle, it makes sense to say, hey, as a last-ditch effort, I'll try anything, you know? But I just want everybody to understand that the most cynical interpretation of what's going on here is the correct one, which is the entire Republican Party is bought by Big Pharma, half the Democratic Party is bought by Big Pharma, the corporate Democrats and the corrupt Republicans got together and they said, okay, let's pass this Right to Try bill and pretend like we care about sick and dying people, but in reality it has more to do with Big Pharma's profits. So just be under no illusions about why they're actually in favor of this. I know they're trying to spin it like they're heroes. They're not. Of course they're not. And then finally, he bragged about deregulation. Listen, you know, we should actually be thanking them for this because they're wearing it on their sleeve, and when the inevitable next crash happens, they now have no wiggle room. So it was tax cuts for the rich and massive deregulation that led to the Great Depression, 1929 stock market crash and the Great Depression, the subprime mortgage crisis and the Great Recession. And, you know, for example, getting rid of Glass-Steagall, there was a wall of separation between commercial banking and investment banking. But once you got rid of that wall of separation, you now had banks taking your depositor money. Regular person works a regular job, deposits your money in the bank, and all of a sudden they're doing all these crazy casino capitalist bets. And as any gambler knows, you do high-risk bets long enough and it's going to go bust at some point. And, you know, that's exactly what happened. And deregulation doesn't turn it over to the smartest guys in the room on Wall Street. It turns it over to the greediest guys in the room. And when they have no rules, have no refs looking over their shoulder to make sure they're on the up and up, what happens? They end up doing terrible things. And, you know, the economy suffers. So understand that deregulation leads to boom-bust cycles. And now you have Donald Trump bragging about financial deregulation. And then when the next crash comes, he has no fucking wiggle room. Every expert's going to say, hey, jackass, you were bragging about your deregulation. Of course the next crash is your fault. You fucking put it into overdrive, dipshit. So for them, again, this all goes back to Donald Trump as the Fox News president, and he's so deep in that bubble. Like, all he's heard is, like, Stuart Varney and Sean Hannity ever mention issues on regulation, and they just feed him a steady diet of regulation bad. So he really believes that everybody agrees regulation bad, and so he brags about deregulation, and when the shit hits the fan, he's got no outs. I mean, he's going to try to blame the Fed, we know that for sure, and he's also going to try to blame Obama, but you just understand that a lot of his actions are speeding up the next crash. So this is he's putting on a clinic here in bragging about things you shouldn't brag about, and it's going to come back to bite him in the ass.